In the summer of 1981, 5 children vanished from their grandmother's farmhouse in southern Texas. They were cousins, ages 6 through 13. Their parents had left them there for a long weekend. A quick road trip to Dallas for a family wedding. It was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be ordinary. Just kids playing on a quiet stretch of farmland while their parents laughed over champagne. But on the morning of June 2nd, the house fell silent. No laughter. No footprints in the garden. No sound of spoons clinking in cereal bowls. Just a grandmother calling names into an empty field and getting nothing back but wind. The oldest, Bennett, had just turned 13. Tall, quiet, and overly protective. His sister, April, 11, was quick-witted and bossy in a way only middle children can be. Dean, their cousin, was 10. A born mimic, always making the others laugh. Rose, 8, had a permanent scratch on one knee and carried a notebook everywhere, writing stories about the bugs she collected. And the youngest, Silas, 6, barely speaking yet, mostly clung to Rose's side. By 7:30 a.m., their grandmother, Eunice Ashcroft, had already started breakfast. The kids usually came down by then, dragging their blankets with them, rubbing sleep from their eyes. But that day, there were no footsteps, no doors creaking open, no flushed cheeks from dreams. She called for them. Once, then twice. She walked upstairs, opened each bedroom door, and found the beds made, neat, as if no one had slept in them at all. That's when the coffee went cold. The farmhouse sat on 38 acres just outside of Clearwood, a town so small it didn't appear on most maps. Just a few storefronts, a post office, and a gas station with one pump and a radio that always played too loud. The Ashcroft house had been there since 1912. Old clapboard siding, green shutters, and a garden Eunice had kept since before her husband died in 1963. People in town said the house had good bones. Big porches, creaking floors that told you someone was home. The kind of place that held echoes of laughter in its wallpaper. By noon, Eunice had called everyone she could. The kids weren't in the house. They weren't in the barn. They weren't by the pond. And the back gate, the one that always stuck, was swinging open in the breeze. She would later tell police. It was like they got up, folded their sheets, and just left, all 5 of them, like a dream, emptied out into the morning. The authorities arrived by 2 p.m. At first, it was treated as a case of wandering, children exploring, maybe lost in the woods. But when the dogs found nothing, no trail, no scent, no clothes snag on branches, the tone shifted. That night, the search began in earnest. Over the next 72 hours, every able-bodied man in Clearwood joined the hunt. They combed through cornfields, ravines, dry wells. They waded through creek beds and crawled beneath barbed wire fencing. State troopers brought in helicopters. Volunteers set up floodlights near the edge of the woods. Divers searched the pond 3 times. No footprints. No dropped toys. No sign of a struggle. Only one strange detail stood out. A wooden toy truck, hand-painted red, was found in the garden bed, half buried in soil, facing the window. It belonged to Silas. Eunice swore she hadn't seen it the day before. Reporters arrived by the weekend. The headline read, 5 children vanished from Texas farmhouse. No leads after 4 days. Locals began to whisper theories. One said the children had run away, walked off into the trees to play a game that went too far. Another said Eunice had gone mad, poisoned them. One woman claimed she saw a white van on the road that morning, parked just past the gate. But when police questioned her, she couldn't remember the license plate, or whether it had been that day or the one before. The parents returned home in a state no words could describe. They had left happy children on a sunny farm and came back to police tape floodlights, and a silence so heavy it hurt to breathe. No ransom note, no demands, no suspects, just empty rooms, folded sheets, and Eunice, standing on the porch, holding a toy truck to her chest and shaking. 10 days in, the case went cold. Not by choice, by silence. The dog stopped tracking. The tips dried up. There were no witnesses, no cameras, no sign of predators. Nothing. The official report was thin. 5 minors. Last seen between 6:30 and 7 a.m. June 2nd. Location, Ashcroft property, Clearwood County. Circumstances, unknown. Time did what always does. It blurred. It softened the edges of panic. People learned to carry on with the ache quietly folded under their tongues. Eunice never moved. She stayed in the house until her death in 2006. Alone, every morning, she sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee, staring out the garden where she said the truck was found. She never gave interviews, never answered the door for strangers. But once, in 1994, she wrote a letter to the local pastor. He never showed it to anyone. Only read one line aloud at her funeral. If they ever come home, the roses will bloom again. No one really understood what it meant. No one thought to look into the flower beds. After her death, the property sat vacant for years. The house rotted slow. Weeds overtook the gate. Vines cracked the wooden siding. And eventually, in 2019, it was purchased by a retired couple from Austin looking to restore it as a quiet weekend retreat. They hired a gardener, a man named Emmett Diaz. Quiet, respectful, early 40s. His job was to clear the overgrown garden and prepare the soil for replanting. He began work in May of 2020, and on the morning of May 12th, while digging beneath a twisted rose bush that hadn't bloomed in decades, his shovel hit something hard. At first, he thought it was stone, a root maybe. He pulled at it, and what came up was a small, curved fragment of bone, smooth, weathered, too clean to be from an animal. It was a jawbone, child-sized, with a single, tiny silver filling still intact. Police were called. The property was sealed. Forensic teams were brought in. That night, under the lights of cameras and gloves and silent dread, the earth gave up more secrets. For full skeletons were found beneath the flower bed, curled inward, positioned deliberately in a crescent shape. Heads toward the center, like petals of a dead bloom. One set of bones had a fracture in the wrist. Another still wore the faded cloth, remains of a dress, tiny white buttons, one pink hair clip. But most chilling of all, there were only 4, not 5. The youngest, Silas, was missing. Again, the bones were sent for testing. Dental records compared. The results would take weeks. But the families already knew. They didn't need science to tell them whose bones they were. They had waited 39 years for an answer. And this was only the beginning. Because what was buried under those roses wasn't just the bodies of missing children. It was the truth. And the truth wasn't finished yet. It was the first time since 1981 that the Ashcroft house made the front page. But this time, it wasn't for missing children. It was for something found, something buried, something small and white and silent for nearly 4 decades. By the afternoon of May 12, 2020, yellow police tape circled the garden like a noose. Reporters circled the fence. Locals gathered at a distance, whispering names they hadn't dared speak in years. Dean, Rose, Bennett, April, and Silas, the boy who still hadn't been found. But that wasn't the question anymore. The question was, who buried them, and why had no one seen it? The garden, overgrown and forgotten for years, became the focus of a full forensic excavation. Over 40 years of roots, earth, and time were peeled back like a wound reopened. Underneath the topsoil, beneath the roses Eunice had tended with such devotion, was a carefully constructed shallow grave. 4 children, each in a curled fetal position, laid in a crescent, heads toward the center, arms tucked tight as if sleeping. The soil around the bones was oddly compacted, mixed with clay and ash. One investigator noted it resembled the kind of earth used in ceremonial burials. And one more thing, each of them had been wrapped in a thin sheet of plastic, not a tarp, not industrial material, just ordinary household plastic, the kind you might use to cover furniture during a paint job. It had long since broken down, but fragments still clung to the bone like skin that refused to rot. No one spoke at the scene, not the detectives, not the cadaver dog handlers, not even the homeowners, who stood stunned on the porch, as if the house itself had betrayed them, because there was no doubt anymore. The children had never left. They were home the whole time. The remains were removed carefully, piece by piece, each placed in its own container, tagged and cataloged. The process took 19 hours. And during that time, 2 things were discovered that would change the investigation forever. The first was a small metal bracelet found beneath the rib cage of one of the skeletons, the one believed to be Rose. It was shaped like a daisy chain, the clasp broken, with the name RL engraved faintly inside. It matched a photo taken in the summer of 1980. Rose sitting on the porch swing, wearing that very bracelet, her notebook in her lap. The second discovery was a sheet of yellowed notebook paper, folded inside what was once a denim pocket. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. "We can't leave. I tried the door again. It won't open from this side. I think she locked it. April cried until she slept. Bennett keeps watch. We think she poisoned the lemonade. If we don't wake up tomorrow, tell Mama we tried to be brave." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The handwriting matched samples from Dean Ashcroft, age 10. The letter wasn't dated, but the reference to lemonade struck a chord. In the original 1981 report, Eunice told police the kids had lemonade and toast for dinner the night before they vanished. Everyone thought it was strange, such a light meal, but Eunice had insisted it was just what the children wanted. Now, it seemed like that may have been the last thing they ever drank. The letter changed the tone of everything. This wasn't an abduction. This wasn't a runaway. This wasn't some stranger in the woods. This was someone inside the house. And only one adult had been there that morning. Eunice. Detective Ray Loring, lead on the reopened case, called for all archived evidence to be re-examined. Old tapes, photographs, witness statements, every word that had been overlooked, including a set of photographs from 1981, taken inside the house just days after the disappearance. In one of them, the dining table was visible, still set for breakfast, 5 plates, 5 glasses, and 1 pitcher of lemonade, half full. Police hadn't tested it at the time. They had no reason to. It was thrown out days later. But one detail from the photo was haunting. A 6th glass, set off to the side, empty, too large to be a child's, likely Eunice's, which meant whatever was in the lemonade, she didn't drink it. An order was issued to exhume Eunice's body. She had been buried in Clearwood Cemetery, in the family plot, beneath a modest stone that read, Eunice May Ashcroft, 1919 to 2006, devoted mother, cherished grandmother, always watching over us. The autopsy was conducted quietly, and though her cause of death had been listed as stroke-related complications, toxicology revealed something unexpected. Trace amounts of chloral hydrate were still present in her bone marrow, a sedative, heavy, often used in the past for sleep, but in large doses, capable of causing unconsciousness, even death. No one could say for sure why it was there, But the timeline now included a haunting possibility. What if Eunice hadn't simply passed in her sleep? What if someone wanted to silence her? Or worse, what if she took it herself? Detective Loring requested a search of the full house with ground-penetrating radar. It hadn't been done in 1981. The technology hadn't existed, and Eunice had refused full access to the basement and garden during the initial search, citing trauma and privacy. Back then, they let her be. But now, with the homeowner's permission, the full structure was scanned. On the second day of the search, under the stairs, they found a sealed compartment behind a false panel. Inside were a tattered stuffed rabbit, a composition notebook with April Ashcroft's name written in careful cursive, a cassette tape labeled simply, June. The rabbit matched one seen in family photos, always clutched by Silas. The notebook was filled with diary entries, short, scattered, but consistent. One page read, "We miss Silas. He went in the back with her and didn't come out. I don't think he's okay. Rose says we have to stay quiet. Bennett doesn't trust her. I'm scared to sleep." The last entry was just one word, help. As for the cassette, it was degraded, warped by time, but it was recovered enough to extract audio. The first 90 seconds were silence, then static, then a voice, soft, small, a boy. "It's day? I don't know. I think they're gone. I think I'm the only one left. If anyone hears this, I was in the crawl space. I found the flashlight, but I heard her. She's still here. Please don't tell her I made this." There was a pause, then a whisper. "My name is Silas. I'm 6. I want to go home now." The tape ends there. Silas had lived long enough to record that message, long enough to be scared, but he was still missing. Even now, the other 4 had been found, but not him, and the deeper investigators went. The more the house seemed to resist. No one could explain the sealed crawl space. No one could trace the tape recorder. No one could find any death certificate or burial records for Silas Ashcroft. The body wasn't there. And the question echoed like wind through the rotting walls. What did Eunice do with him? The garden, now turned excavation site, continued to yield fragments. A shoelace, a rusted tin lunchbox, a page from a children's book, bloated with moisture but still legible. The title, "Where Do the Lost Things Go?" Inside, someone had drawn a spiral in black ink, over and over, page after page. A spiral that matched the scratches found on the wall of the crawl space. It wasn't decoration. It was obsession. Clearwood's local newspaper ran the headline, "Bones in the Garden, Silence Shattered After 39 Years." But the families didn't speak to reporters. Not yet. They were waiting for the full truth, or at least the closest thing to it. Because truth, like bones, doesn't rot. It waits. It listens. And when it's ready, it rises. By the end of that summer, 4 names would be added to a new memorial stone outside the Ashcroft farmhouse. But the 5th space remained blank. And in that silence, the town began to wonder, was Silas ever buried at all? Or was he still out there, somewhere beneath the roots, somewhere past the lies, somewhere only a child could fit through? The garden held 4 children, but everyone remembered 5. Bennett, April, Dean, Rose, and Silas, the youngest, 6 years old, soft-spoken, often sick, the one who never quite fit in, and the one whose body still hadn't been found. After the discovery of the first 4 skeletons beneath the rose bed and the disturbing cassette of Silas's whisper, investigators began to search the rest of the Ashcroft property with a different kind of urgency, not to confirm what happened, but to find out what had been hidden for so long. Because someone, most likely Eunice herself, had gone to great lengths to make sure Silas's story never made it to daylight. Detective Ray Loring sat in a rented car just beyond the edge of the old fence line the day the full excavation began. It was mid-June 2020 now, exactly 39 years and 14 days since the disappearance. She was listening to the tape again. "My name is Silas. I'm 6. I want to go home now." She'd heard it 47 times, and every time she came back to that same 3-second pause before the whisper. A breath, a sound, maybe fabric, maybe movement, but there was something else, just faint enough to be missed. A click, like a latch, or a lock. She kept thinking about the line. She's still here, but Eunice had been dead for over a decade. So what or who had Silas heard? That same day, a construction crew unearthed something else, something that had been overlooked by every search before. Behind the barn near a collapsed chicken coop, they found a wooden well covering buried under ivy and leaves. The boards had rotted. The iron ring that once held a bucket was gone, but the shape was unmistakable. And when they cleared the debris, they saw the dark circle of a shaft only a few feet wide, disappearing into blackness. It hadn't been documented in 1981, wasn't on any of the old property maps. Not even Eunice's hand-drawn sketch from the county survey included it. But there it was, hidden for years, right in the open. The team lowered a camera inside. At 14 feet, the lens caught something pale. A small shoe, child-size, caked in dust and algae, still tied. Then next to it, a cloth bundle, wrapped tight in twine, like someone had meant for it to stay that way forever. They extracted it carefully. Inside the bundle were a faded drawing crayon, 5 stick figures standing in a row, a matchbox filled with seashells, a strip of paper with letters that read, SILES, each one written backwards, and a tooth, a small molar, clean and unbroken. DNA testing confirmed what everyone feared. The tooth belonged to Silas Ashcroft, but that was all they found. No body, no bones, just those pieces, as if he had vanished into the dark and left only a whisper behind. With each discovery, the image of Eunice Ashcroft shifted. To the town, she had once been a grieving grandmother, then a recluse, then a mystery. Now she was something worse. In her will, Eunice left behind a sealed envelope. It had remained untouched for 14 years, tucked into a manila folder in a Clearwood lawyer's cabinet. It wasn't to be opened until the property changed ownership twice. The lawyer, retired by now, had forgotten about it completely. But when Detective Loring made the request, the envelope was finally handed over. Inside was a letter. No greeting, no apology, just one line. The 5th is in the hollow. He's the one I couldn't keep. There was no signature, just a spiral drawn in ink. The same spiral carved into the crawlspace wall. The same spiral repeated in Silas's drawings. The same spiral scratched into the base of one of the flower pots near the rose bed, missed by investigators for decades. What was a hollow? No one knew. The property had no natural depressions, no caves, no cellars beyond the main house. But Eunice used the word like it meant something personal, like a code passed only between her and the boy she called the one I couldn't keep. In the months that followed, Loring interviewed over 24 people who had known the Ashcrofts, an old farmhand, a neighbor who once sold eggs to Eunice, the pastor who had read her letter aloud at her funeral, and one man, Harvey Tull, now 73, claimed he had once seen a child near the back of property late at night. "I thought it was a deer," he said. "Too small, but it was moving strange, kinda stumbling. I called out, but it was gone." He said it happened around 82 or 83. He hadn't told anyone, not until now. But what stuck with Loring was what he said next. That boy wasn't running. He was looking for somewhere to hide. Investigators widened the search perimeter. In an overgrown field beyond the fence, dogs picked up an old scent. A patch of earth, disturbed decades ago, led to a collapsed root cellar, hidden beneath a rotted trapdoor covered in moss. It was barely 3 feet wide. No ladder, just dirt walls and shallow slope, sealed in by time. Inside, they found what remained of a child's blanket, patterned with faded blue stars, and embedded in the corner of the wall, a handprint, pressed in mud. Small, desperate, there were no remains, but there were scratches on the underside of the roof. Tiny marks, carved by fingernails, and again the spiral, drawn in circles until the wood splintered. One thing became clear. Silas hadn't died in that house. He hadn't died in that garden. He had escaped. Somehow, some way, he'd slipped through whatever trap Eunice had set and made it outside. But if he'd survived, where did he go? And why hadn't he ever been found? In July, a new lead surfaced. A woman named Rita Barnes, age 64, came forward with something she had never shared. Not with her husband, not even with her children. She lived 2 towns over from Clearwood in 1981, ran a small thrift store with her sister. She remembered a day, around late June, when an older woman had come into the store with a young boy. The boy was quiet, didn't speak, wouldn't look up. He held a toy rabbit that was missing an ear. The woman bought 2 pairs of shoes, a map, and a cassette recorder, paid in cash, left quickly. But what stuck with Rita was what the woman whispered to the boy before they left. No names, no noise. You're my secret now. Rita hadn't thought about it in years, not until she saw the newspaper headline about the bones. Then she remembered the boy's eyes. I know what I saw, she said. That boy wasn't hers, and he wasn't safe. Could it have been Eunice? Possibly. The timeline fit. But no cameras, no receipt, just a memory. One more thread in a tapestry full of holes. With no body, no grave, and only pieces of a life left behind, Silas became something else. Not just a missing child, not just a victim. He became a ghost that haunted the gaps in the story. The spiral, the whispers, the phrase, the one I couldn't keep. Detective Loring kept a photo of him on her desk, black and white, from the last known picture taken, the summer before he disappeared. Silas standing beside Rose, too small for his shirt, holding up a frog, half smiling. He looked tired. Even then, that fall, the Ashcroft farmhouse was officially declared a crime scene. The homeowners moved out. The property was sealed. The FBI closed their reopened file with this conclusion. Cause of death for Bennett, April, Dean, and Rose Ashcroft remains undetermined. Evidence suggests asphyxiation, possibly chemical. Eunice Ashcroft is considered the primary suspect in the deaths of all 4 children. 5th child, Silas Ashcroft, remains missing, presumed deceased. But Detective Loring didn't agree. She kept going, because she believed something no one else did, that Silas got away. And if he did, he might have left behind one final clue, one final piece, just waiting to be seen. Silas wasn't where the others were, not under the roses, not in the well, not curled beneath the roots of the collapsed root cellar. The others had been buried with care, with intention. But Silas had been missing for 39 years. And in all that time, no one had found him. Not the search teams. Not the cadaver dogs. Not even Eunice's letter had pointed to a body. Only one sentence. The 5th is in the hollow. He's the one I couldn't keep. By the fall of 2020, that line had become an obsession for Detective Ray Loring. She recited it in her head, over and over, every day. What was the hollow? Where had Silas gone? And who, if anyone, had helped him, because after weeks of digging, crawling through crawl spaces, and listening to that degraded cassette over 100 times, Lauren was convinced of one thing. Silas survived, at least for a while. There was no proof, only fragments. The drawing, the tooth, the whispered message on the tape, the blanket with stars, the field hand who swore he saw a boy running, barefoot and stumbling, sometime in '82. But that was enough. And sometimes, when everything else is lost, it only takes a fragment to light a fuse. Clearwood had one post office. One man had worked there from 1975 to 2001. Gordon Millis, now 84. Still sharp. Still lived in the same house behind the Baptist church. When Loring visited him, he was watching the news, a story about the remains found at the Ashcroft farm. He turned down the volume and said quietly, "You're here about the shoebox, aren't you?" She hadn't even spoken yet. Gordon led her to his attic, dusty and hot, full of yellow folders and rubber-banded stacks of local mail. At the back, under an old Christmas tree box, was a small cardboard container marked in blue pen, Ashcroft, return to sender 1985. It held 17 unopened envelopes, all addressed to Silas Ashcroft. No stamps, no postmarks, handwritten, all in the same neat cursive. Loring carefully opened one. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You're doing so well. Just a little longer. She can't find us out here. Remember what I told you. Keep quiet, keep hidden, stay warm. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you." Signed, Nellie. That name hadn't come up before. Not once in Eunice's family tree. Not in town records. Not in the original case file. Who was Nellie? The letters were dated in the corner. April through October of 1985. 3 years after the disappearance. 14 months after the original investigation had gone completely cold. Each note included subtle references. "The creek's water is too high to cross again. I've marked your pages with the spiral. Bury them if someone comes. They'll think you're gone, but you're not. You're just farther." The letters painted a picture that no one had dared to imagine, that someone had hidden Silas, protected him, kept him away from whatever horror happened in that house. And whoever Nellie was, she'd been in contact with him for at least 6 months in 1985. But then nothing. The letters stopped. Loring had them analyzed. Same paper stock. Same handwriting. Likely a woman. Age estimated mid-40s to 60s at the time of writing. The spiral appeared in every letter. Sometimes small. Sometimes filling entire corners. Not decoration. Symbol. The same spiral carved on wood, drawn in crayon, scratched into crawlspace walls. Some kind of code. Some kind of belief. Digging into county records, Loring searched for anyone named Nellie who had ever lived near Clearwood or surrounding counties during the 1980s. Only 2 matches. One was a nurse, deceased since 1991. The other, Nellie Greaves, had lived in a cabin near Camber Ridge, 37 miles north of Clearwood, off an unpaved road, with no telephone or list of relatives. She had died in 2003. No children, no spouse, but the cabin still existed. The property had long since returned to the state, empty, abandoned, sinking into the dirt. But the structure was intact enough to enter. Inside, dust covered everything. Mice nests in the corners. Wallpaper curling like old skin. On the mantel, behind a cracked photograph, Loring found a box. Locked, rust-eaten. It took 3 tries with a crowbar to open it. Inside, a child's sock. 3 more letters never sent. A folded Polaroid, heavily faded, and a small wooden carving, a rabbit, 1 ear missing. The sock was labeled with a laundry tag, SA. The Polaroid was grainy, barely legible, but in it, the faint outline of a child, standing at the edge of a tree line, looking back, a stuffed rabbit in his hand. Loring took the photo to the families. None could say for certain, but Rose's mother cried when she saw it. "It's him," she whispered. "I know it's him." The image was dated August 14th, 1985. That was the last known trace. Back at the cabin, a final clue was found. A trapdoor under floorboards. Not deep, just a shallow crawl space like a burrow. Inside, old blankets. A metal lunchbox. And etched on the underside of the trapdoor, scratched into the wood. I waited. I listened, but she didn't come back. The spiral, once more carved below it, was Nellie protecting Silas, or hiding him? Was she running from Eunice, or from something else? The deeper Loring searched, the more the case slipped into shadow, because what started as a disappearance had become a story of survival, of fear, a child running to the woods with no shoes, clutching a broken toy, listening for footsteps behind him. And then one more piece. At the back of a drawer in a Camber Ridge cabin, under a plate with chipped edges, Loring found a guest book. It was for a nearby roadside motel. Apparently, Nellie had kept it for some reason, or taken it by accident. Most of the names meant nothing. But on the page for September 3rd, 1986, a scrawled entry read, S. Abbott/age 12/traveling with guardian. The handwriting was familiar, careful, large, the way a child trying to impress an adult might write. Abbott, Silas Ashcroft. S.A. It was him. He had lived. Longer than anyone imagined. Beyond the tapes. Beyond the drawings. Past the whispers of Eunice's poison lemonade. He had made it to 1986. But then the trail stopped. Once more, Detective Loring returned to Clearwood. She walked the ground of the farmhouse, past the rose bed, past the empty well, to the collapsed cellar where the spiral still waited. And she whispered, "I know you were here. I know you ran." Because Silas's story was not just a tragedy. It was a testimony, a voice carved in wood, a whisper caught on tape, a boy who had every reason to be gone, and yet somehow kept leaving pieces behind. Was he still out there? Somewhere? Alive? Old now, a man in his 40s, carrying the ghost of a childhood that never let go? Or had he disappeared completely? Not in death, but in silence? Because not every grave is marked. Not every story is solved. And not every survivor is ready to be found. By the time autumn fell across Clearwood in 2020, most people believed the story had ended. For small graves, a missing fifth child, a house finally emptied of its secrets. But for Detective Ray Loring, the case was still open, not officially. The paperwork had been filed, the evidence boxed, the federal team disbanded. But in her hands and in her heart, something refused to rest. It was the sound of that boy's voice on the cassette, whispering softly through dust and time. "Please don't tell her I made this. My name is Silas. I'm 6. I want to go home now." Not everything leaves fingerprints, but voices. They leave something deeper. And voices, like ghosts, never forget where they came from. On November 2nd, 2020, Loring received a call from a retired therapist named Eli Chambers, age 82, living 2 hours outside of Clearwood. He'd read about the farmhouse in the paper, about the cassette, the spiral, the missing boy, and he said something simple but chilling. "I think he came to see me once." It was 1998, 22 years after the children vanished. Chambers had been running a private practice in Oak Hill, Texas, mostly trauma therapy, veterans, survivors, runaways. He remembered the session because the man never gave his full name, said to call him Seth. Late 20s, thin, pale, wore gloves even in the summer. Said he had memories he didn't trust, images he couldn't place, and dreams always the same, trapped in a small space, a spiral drawn on the wall, the sound of a woman breathing on the other side of the door. Chambers had recorded all his sessions, with consent. When he passed the tape to Loring, it was brittle and warped with age, but playable. The voice on the recording was older than Silas would have been in 1981. But the tone, that voice, still soft, still cautious, still rehearsed. The tape began like this. Sometimes I remember 5 of us. Sometimes just me. I don't know which is real. There was a hallway, blue paint. A door that never opened. I remember lemonade. I remember waking up to quiet. And the spiral, always the spiral. She said it keeps the silence in. Chambers asked, "Do you remember your name?" The man on tape paused, then whispered, "I remember someone calling me Rabbit. I think my name started with an S. Seth, Silas. S.A. like the sock, like the matchbox, like the initials on every scribbled note buried in the garden." Loring froze when she heard it, played it back again. She said it keeps the silence in. The session lasted 42 minutes. The man mentioned a wooden trapdoor, a blanket with stars, a woman who hummed through her teeth, a toy with one ear missing. He described hiding, running, being told never to speak his name aloud. He said he didn't remember much after age 6, except for one moment. He was in a motel. He wrote essay in a guest book. A woman told him he was safe now. That was the last time he saw her. He believed her name was Nellie, but the tape didn't stop there. Near the end, a moment no one expected. The man began to cry, softly, then more. I don't know what happened to the others. I hear them sometimes, in dreams. April, Rose, Bennett, Dean. I don't remember their faces, but I remember their names. I think she hurt them. I think she gave them something to sleep, and I think I watched it happen. I didn't stop it. Then silence, just breathing, and then one last whisper. I dug a hole behind the coop. I buried the bracelet there. I don't know why. I just didn't want her to have it. The bracelet. It had been found beneath Rose's rib cage, the daisy chain, engraved RL. Had it been buried then moved? Was Silas trying to protect her memory? Or hide the evidence? Loring didn't know. But what she did know was this. No one had ever buried it near the coop. That meant someone went back, unearthed it, and placed it with the body. Eunice, or Nellie. Someone who wanted to control the narrative. Chambers never saw Seth again. He tried calling the number he left. Disconnected. He mailed a letter. No reply. But before he left, the man had written something in Chambers' guest ledger. Not a name, just a symbol, a spiral, over and over, 6 times. Then beneath it, I am the silence now. Loring ran the tape through advanced voice matching, compared it to the 1981 cassette, analyzed the speech patterns. There was no definitive match, but the tonal profile, the tremble, the cadence, the rhythm of breath, all lined up. It wasn't proof in court, but it was proof in the bones of the story. Silas may have lived to age 28. He may have walked into a therapist's office. He may have tried to piece himself together. But if he did, where did he go next? The trail ran cold again. No records, no ID, no trace. Just a voice in a room. A boy who watched his world fall apart, and then spent a lifetime trying not to remember it. But sometimes memory survives, even when names do not. And Silas, or Seth, or whatever name he carried, left one more thing behind. A truth no one expected. While reviewing the guest book tape, a sound analyst caught something strange. At minute 23, as the man recounted a memory of being locked inside the Ashcroft cellar, a sound cuts through. A second voice, faint, distant, caught by the mic. Only one word. Rabbit. Not the man speaking. Someone else. A woman. Whispered like a memory bleeding through time. It wasn't Chambers. And the man on tape didn't react, which meant it wasn't present in the room. But it was there, buried in the hiss of the tape. Loring sat in her car after hearing it. Didn't move for hours. She realized something. The man hadn't come to confess. He'd come to warn. About what? She still didn't know. But somewhere, buried under 39 years of earth, lies, silence, and spirals, there was a final thread. And she wasn't going to stop until she found it. Because Silas, the boy who wasn't buried, had been speaking all along, through wood, through tape, through tears. And she had one last place to look. They always say the dead can't speak, but some do, in the quietest ways. In scratches on the walls, in spirals beneath paint, in cassette whispers and Polaroids that outlast time, and sometimes in words they leave behind for no one but someone like Detective Ray Loring. The recording from a therapist's office haunted her, not just the words, but the second voice, faint, female, whispering only one word, rabbit. Too quiet to be heard during the original session. Too strange to explain away as static. It wasn't a voice anyone could identify. But it meant one thing. Silas still carried her. Eunice. Her voice. Her rules. Her ghosts. Even after running. Even after disappearing. She was in his head. Loring stared at a map for hours one night. She retraced every location connected to Silas. Clearwood, Camber Ridge, the motel with the SA guest book entry, the therapist's office in Oak Hill, a triangle, almost perfect, and at the center, one town she hadn't considered, Marin's Hill, a nowhere place, population 300, no stoplights, just an old feed store, a shut-down gas station, and a collapsed church on the outskirts of town. She found it by accident, an article from 1999, reporting a fire at a place called the Chapel of Restoration. No one had been hurt. No official congregation listed. But the article mentioned something peculiar. A set of journals recovered by fire crews, waterlogged but handwritten. Dozens. All signed only Seth. Loring's heart stopped. She drove to Marin's Hill the next morning. The chapel still stood, barely. Its steeple crooked, roof caved in. Ivy coiled like veins along the bricks. Shattered stained glass curled in the weeds. The wooden door had collapsed inward. Inside, the pews were blackened by fire. The altar reduced to splinters. But in the back, behind the pulpit, under a melted cabinet, she found it, a metal crate, rusty, chained shut but cracked open by time. Inside, 13 journals, a wooden rabbit, scorched but intact, and a note written in that same large, careful handwriting. If someone finds these, please don't look for me. I'm not the boy you're trying to save. I'm what's left after you gave up. Signed, Seth. The journals began in 1992. Each one chronicled fragments. Not a linear story, but pieces. Silas's voice, buried beneath layers of adult dissociation, trauma, and survival. Some entries were lucid, others rambling. But through them, a single truth emerged. He had escaped. Eunice had tried to poison all 5. For drank. He didn't. Because, as he wrote, I saw something in her eyes. She looked like she'd already buried me. So he faked sleep, waited until night, and ran. He remembered crawling under floorboards, finding a tunnel she had once used to hide moonshine, following it until it would turn to dirt and then to light. He spent 2 nights in the woods, then found Nellie. Or rather, she found him. Nellie wasn't a relative, not a neighbor. She had once been a caretaker for Eunice's mother, long before the farmhouse became what it was. She recognized the spiral, knew what it meant, and knew what Eunice had become. She took Silas in, gave him food, a blanket, a new name, Seth. She told me I was born again, he wrote, that the spiral meant I had been pulled out of the dark. But the trauma didn't leave him. Even under Nellie's care, he hid, drew spirals in corners, whispered to shadows. She taught him not to speak of the past, told him the world outside would never believe him. So they vanished, moved cabins, changed towns. Then in 1986, Nellie died. A stroke. Silas was 11. He buried her behind the cabin, wrapped her body in the same blue blanket she'd given him. Then he walked miles, days, until motel manager took pity and let him stay in a supply closet for a week. He never gave his real name again. The journals told of years lived in fragments, a fishing dock job under an alias, sleeping in libraries, a near-death winter in Tulsa, a woman who offered him shelter, but whose perfume reminded him too much of lemon. He never stayed anywhere long, never spoke of the farmhouse, but he kept the spiral, carved into benches, drawn on napkins, once even tattooed it, in ink he made himself, because to him it was never about faith. The spiral means I kept going, he wrote. It means the story didn't end where she wanted it to. The most haunting entry was dated May 27, 2001. It's been 20 years. I still see them. In the dark, in my sleep, Bennett reaching for me, April's laugh in the hallway, Dean's pocket knife, Rose's bracelet. I should have taken them with me. I was a coward. I was a rabbit. Then the last lines. There's a door in me now. It never opens. But behind it, she's still there. And I'm still 6. Detective Loring closed the journal slowly, hands trembling. She had no badge now, no official case. But this was the answer. Not for the police, not for the press, but for the children, for Silas, and maybe for herself. She didn't try to find him after that. The final journal entry was dated 2006. After that, no records, no sightings. He had chosen his silence, his spiral, and perhaps that was his peace. Back in Clearwood, the farmhouse was demolished in January 2021. No ceremony, no memorial, just rubble. Loring took one last trip there, stood where the roses used to grow. She buried a copy of Silas's final letter under the soil. On the back, she wrote, "You were never the rabbit. You were the storm, and you kept running." Then, with her own hand, she drew a spiral in the dirt. They say the dead can't speak, but sometimes the silence do, through broken tapes and forgotten journals, and the space between a name remembered and a boy lost in time. Silas was never a ghost. He was a survivor, and he left us everything we needed. If we listened, Clearwood was quiet again. The farmhouse had been leveled, the bones laid to rest, the whispers buried, at least the ones the town was ready to hear. But the spiral hadn't stopped. It had simply moved. And in late February of 2021, it showed up where no one expected, on the back of a playground bench, carved into wood as if left by a child. But no child's hand moved like that. The bench sat in Trinity Hollow, a town 400 miles north of Clearwood. Population, 700. known for little else but an annual apple festival and a river walk too shallow for fish. But what made it matter was that a local groundskeeper found something strange one morning. He'd been clearing frost off the place structures when he noticed a new carving, recent, rough, but deliberate, a spiral, exactly like the ones the Clearwood case had made infamous. He brushed snow off the armrest, and below the spiral, scratched in the same deep groove, were 4 letters, SA8-6. It didn't take long for word to reach Detective Ray Loring. Even off duty, even after stepping away from the case entirely, she still checked local chatter, still followed up on any whisper spirals, cassette players, or backward initials. She drove to Trinity Hollow that same week, and when she ran her fingers along the grooves in the bench, she froze. Because the carving style, slanted, over-etched, cautious, matched exactly the journals found in the Chapel of Silence. It was his. The park had no cameras. No visitors that day on record. But custodian recalled something from 3 nights earlier, just before the snow fell. An older man, maybe late 40s, wore a navy coat, sat on the bench for hours without moving, didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't seem homeless, clean clothes, trim beard. He just sat, staring at the empty swings, until the sun went down. Then he walked away, didn't look back. That night, Loring booked a room in town. She brought the journals with her, laid them out across the motel bed. She compared the spiral on the bench to the drawings from Seth's notebooks. It matched, even the hash marks around it. 6 vertical notches, always drawn in the same left to right order. It was a code, personal, like a clock only he could read. And the 86? Maybe the year, the motel entry, the age he claimed Nellie died. Or maybe something else. The next morning, she searched Trinity Hollow's public records. Nothing stood out. No recent newcomers. No unusual deaths. No one named Seth or Silas in any database. But just as she was leaving, the librarian offered something unexpected. A small donation box had arrived weeks prior. Anonymous. No note. Inside, 5 first-edition children's books, all carefully wrapped, along with a $20 bill and a cassette labeled Rose. The librarian hadn't listened to it. No working player. Loring borrowed it. And that night, she pressed play. It was music. A single song, recorded off the radio. Old static, intercut with faint echoes. The song? Landslide by Fleetwood Mac. But what caught her breath wasn't the lyrics. It was what came at the end, after the music faded. Just a voice. Male, barely audible. He said, "Rose like this one." She used to hum it. I remember the way she held her cup like it was glass, even though it was plastic. I remember her bracelet shining under the porch light. I should have gone back for her. I should have gone back. Then silence. Then once again the spiral. Not drawn. Spoken. I still remember how to draw it. Start in the middle. Never stop. Click. The tape ended. Loring sat there in the dark motel room, hands folded, cassette spinning empty. This wasn't a recording made for the public. It wasn't part of some message trail. It was a confession. One no one had asked for, and maybe one Silas didn't even want anyone to hear. But he left it anyway, because memory, like a spiral, doesn't unwind. It only deepens. Over the next week, she tracked public cameras, local sightings, library visitor logs. She never found him. No name, no match, nothing recent. It was like he'd passed through Trinity Hollow, the way wind passes through trees. Quietly, without trace, but never without change. The librarian said something that stuck with her. He wasn't lost. He was remembering, like he'd come here to leave something behind. By March, Clearwood had built a small memorial park near the edge of town. Just 5 trees. No statues. No plaque. Only initials carved into each trunk. B.A., Yell, D.M., R.L., and an empty 5th tree unmarked for the one who never came home. That spring, a letter arrived at the Clearwood Public Library. No return address. Postmarked from nowhere. Inside was a sketch, a child's crayon drawing. 5 figures holding hands. Above them, a spiral sun. And in the corner, a rabbit, just sitting, watching, waiting. Loring never told anyone about the voice on the cassette, not the tape labeled Rose, not the journals in the chapel, not the final confession whispered under snow. Some stories deserve to rest where they were last told, and Silas, or Seth, or the rabbit in the spiral, he had left his footprints in enough places. Now he deserved to walk, one last time, into silence. But every now and then, a spiral shows up, etched into tree bark, drawn in sidewalk chalk, sewn into the corner of a thrift store quilt. No one else sees it, but she does. And every time she wonders, is he still out there? A man who outran the past, carried ghosts in his pockets, and chose to survive when no one expected him to. He was never a missing child. He was a reminder that even the smallest escape can echo forever. She hadn't opened her mailbox in 3 days. Ray Loring was retired now. Not officially. The badge was still in her drawer. But in every other way, she'd step back. No more court calls. No cold cases. No whispers from counties who just wanted her thoughts. She had closed the Ashcroft file, buried what she could, let the rest vanish in the wind, until one morning, in late July of 2021, she found an envelope with no stamp, no sender, and only one word written in black ink. Listen. Inside, a cassette, a small antique key, tarnished, bent at the tip, a single sheet of paper, folded twice, tightly, and a photograph. The paper read. She spoke once. One last time. You missed it. The photo was of a house Ray had seen once before. Not the farmhouse. Not the chapel. Not even the cabin where Nellie kept her journals. This house was new, to her, but old to the story. She stared at it for hours, and then she drove 2 hours south, just across the Texas border, to the outskirts of a place called Tanner's Well. She didn't call ahead, didn't file a warrant. She just showed up because the front porch in the photo was real, and because on its frame the spiral had been burned into the wood, not scratched, not carved, burned, deliberately, deeply, the kind of mark that says, this is the last door. The house had been condemned. Property of the county since 1996. No registered owner since 1983. When she found the lock, the key fit perfectly. The inside smelled like dust and something older. Rotting wood, mildew, salt. On the wall, a single hook, empty. Beneath it, a broken mirror. And in the center of the floor, a tape player, plugged into a long-dead outlet, wired to nowhere. She didn't hesitate. She pressed play. The voice that emerged wasn't Silas. It wasn't Seth. It wasn't anyone she expected. It was Eunice. Weak, slow, but unmistakably her. And this time, she wasn't singing. This is my confession. Or maybe it's a warning. Or maybe it's just a way to stay alive longer than I deserve. They'll call me a killer, a poisoner, a madwoman, but they never saw what I saw. The spiral wasn't mine. It was never mine. It belonged to the house. It spoke in breath, in silence, in patterns that showed up in my tea leaves, in the way the wind bent the roses. It told me the children had to go. Loring paused the tape. Her hands were shaking. This wasn't a confession. It was a delusion. But delusions have detail. And in the next 5 minutes, that tape gave her everything she'd ever needed to understand how deep the spiral went. Not as a drawing, but a belief. Silas wasn't like the others. He knew the spiral. Drew it before I ever taught him. I thought that meant he was chosen. I thought it meant he'd stay. But the spiral is tricky. It saves the quiet ones, and it swallows the loud. I made them tea. I watched them fall asleep. I sang to them while they slipped away. Except him. There was silence on the tape after that. You could hear the faint creak of a chair. A breath held too long. Then Eunice's voice dropped lower. Colder. Almost like a different person was speaking through her. He buried the bracelet. I found it. He thought I wouldn't look behind the coop. But I know all the hiding places. I put it back, where she would have wanted it. I told them in my head that they'd never be found. But I guess I was wrong about that. The spiral doesn't end. It just folds inward. Then something happened. A sound on the tape. A knock. 1. Then 2. Followed by the faint sound of her voice. Rabbit? Is that you? And then, you finally came back to finish the story. Click. End of tape. Ray sat in that rotting house for what felt like hours. The light through the boards flickered like candle flame. The heat pressed against her like a memory. And all she could hear was that last sentence. You finally came back to finish the story. That meant Silas had been there. After she died. After 1983. He had returned to the house. Maybe once. Maybe often. And he'd left that cassette behind for someone to find. But who? And how did it end up with Loring? Whoever mailed it knew too much. Had access. Knew every turn in the spiral. She thought of Seth's journals. The cassette marked rows. The playground bench. And now, this. A pattern. Not a trail of evidence. A ritual. She checked the house. Every floorboard. Every drawer. The walls behind the peeling wallpaper. And in a hollow near the fireplace, she found a final box. It contained only 2 items. A drawing, crayon on yellow paper, of 5 children holding hands beneath a spiral sky, and a clipping from a 2020 newspaper. The headline read, 4th skeleton identified in Clearwood cold case. Someone had kept the news. Someone had cared. And someone had placed this here, like a bookmark. A pause before the final chapter. Loring walked out into the afternoon heat. The grass had grown wild. Snakes in the underbrush. Cicadas screaming. She looked back at the porch. The spiral still burned into the frame. Not fading. Not cracked. Preserved. Like it had been meant to last. She didn't call the station. Didn't log evidence. Didn't submit the tape. She just walked. Back to her car. Back to the road. Because whatever this story was now, it didn't belong in courtrooms, or case files, or podcasts. It belonged in the silence, where it started, where it ended. Eunice had left her mark. On wood. On minds. On the one boy who got away. But she didn't get the last word. Not anymore. That belonged to Silas. And maybe to whoever mailed the tape. Because the spiral, Ray realized, had never been evil, just misunderstood. It wasn't about control. It was about memory, a way to return, over and over, until the story felt whole again. And now, all that remained was the ending. One more spiral, one more voice, and one more door, waiting to open. The town forgot again. Or maybe it tried to by the fall of 2021. Clearwood was moving on. The news vans had long since left. The farmhouse was dust. And the story, the one people once whispered in grocery aisles and prayed about in pews, was now just that, A story, a line in the town's timeline, a wound neatly stitched and buried beneath the surface. But stories like these don't stay buried. They wait, and one gray morning in November, a man appeared at the memorial. It was just after dawn. No one saw him arrive. No one recognized him. But the local mailman noticed something strange as he walked past the grove. A figure, tall, hunched slightly, coat too big for his frame, standing perfectly still between the 5 trees, hands in his pockets, staring at the unmarked trunk, the one meant for the missing 5th child. He didn't cry, didn't pray, didn't move, just stood there like he was listening, like the silence still spoke to him. By the time the mailman circled back, the man was gone, but at the base of the tree, something had been left, taped gently to the bark, with care only a child or someone frozen in time might use. A folded page, torn from a composition notebook, edges frayed, lines crooked. On it, drawn in pencil, a spiral, surrounding it, 5 names, written with the shakiness of someone unpracticed. Bennett, April, Rose, Dean, Silas, all 5. For the first time together, the note was turned over to the sheriff. But it never made the papers. Some things, the town had decided, didn't need to be public. They were better left in a hush between wind and grass, in the space where memory keeps breathing, long after the lungs have stopped. Still, Ray Loring saw the photograph. She knew the names. She knew the hand. And when she noticed the last strange detail, her breath caught in her throat. At the very bottom of the page, beneath the spiral, written so faint it was nearly invisible. I remember now. The door wasn't locked. I just wasn't ready. That same day, a woman arrived at the Clearwood library. She was in her late 20s, carried a canvas bag with buttons on it, asked about a donation box that had once contained a cassette labeled Rose. The librarian recognized her from the sketch Silas had left behind in one of the journals, a child in a red coat holding a paper rabbit, now grown, but familiar. Her name was Delia Marks, and she had something to deliver. It was a letter, unsealed, folded carefully, written in blocky handwriting, that same unmistakable print, dated October 2021. Tanner's well-return address. Delia said it was handed to her by a man who worked briefly at the halfway house where she volunteered. He came once, helped repaint the children's room, didn't say much, but before he left, he gave her the envelope and said, "If you ever pass through Clearwood, this belongs there." She'd held on to it for weeks. Until now, the librarian gave it to Loring the next day. The letter read, "To whoever still listens, I remember more now. Not everything, but enough." The tea smelled like lemon. The porch light buzzed. April made fun of my shoes. Dean tried to build a raft out of milk crates. Bennett found a turtle and named it Harold. Rose had a daisy bracelet that she thought made her invisible. And me? I hid under the stairs, drew spirals, whispered my name until it didn't feel real anymore. I used to think surviving meant forgetting, that if I could just outrun the memories, the ghosts would stop following me. But I was wrong. They weren't chasing me. They were waiting for me to stop and turn around. This story doesn't end with justice, or revenge, or even peace. It ends with remembering that we were here, that we mattered, that even when the world closed its eyes, we still made a sound. And maybe that's enough. I'm going now. Not far, but far enough. I've left the spiral where it belongs. In your hands now. P.S. Rabbit always runs. But sometimes he circles back. Ray folded the letter slowly, hands trembling. She placed in the same file as the journals, the tapes, the photos. But something in her heart knew the case was no longer hers. The story was. And stories don't close. They echo. 2 months later, a child playing in the woods behind her grandmother's house, 3 towns over, found something strange under a pine tree. It was a wooden rabbit, paint chipped, ears uneven, but carved with care. On its underside, a spiral, and one word, remember. No one ever saw the man again. No more benches, no more tapes. But those who've been following the story, really following it, they noticed something strange, something small. Spirals started appearing in the margins of borrowed books, on the backs of stop signs, etched into park benches, drawn in sidewalk chalk. Not everywhere, not loud, but present, as if the memory had begun to plant roots in the world. Ray never reopened the case. There was no need. The bones had been found. The truth had come in pieces. And the boy, the one they all thought died in 1981, had finally found a way to speak. And in doing so, he gave them all something rare. Closure without erasure. A memory without a grave. 5 kids vanished on a Texas morning, but one came back, not to explain, not to accuse, just to leave a trail, so the rest of us wouldn't forget, so we'd know that some stories survive in the silence. And now, years later, if you find yourself driving through Clearwood, take a detour, find the memorial grove, stand by the 5th tree, trace your finger along the trunk. You might not see it at first. It's faint and only visible in morning light, but it's there, a spiral, drawn in the grain, waiting. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. Tell me where in the world you're watching and what time the truth found you.